What's going on, everyone? So today and yesterday, I spent a ton of my time watching a bunch of live streams for small cash tournaments, as well as receiving a ton of information from random people in my community, and just again checking out more live streams on all these random store showdowns popping up as it's that time in the set. Back in set one, about a month and a half before set two actually released, we all played our store showdowns. So it's basically what everyone's doing in the community in Star Wars Unlimited right now. And so we're getting a ton of information about that. And so we get to talk about the meta and what most people are playing. Now, I got a lot of things to talk about. And of course, I actually have kind of what I consider the top 7 archetypes, or even not necessarily what I consider, but just what consistently shows up in top placings across the board that we're going to talk about. 7 different archetypes, and of course just some of the finals of the live streams that I explicitly watched. Before we do, big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Some of this information does come from some of you sent in some messages and talked about your store showdowns, but also I have a TCG player link in the description down below. Be sure to use it for any Star Wars Unlimited cards. But let's talk about these cash tournaments that I checked out today and yesterday. So as you can see, this is from the Nexus, the London GT 1K. It was really fun. I always enjoy watching, not necessarily like pro tournaments, but competitive Star Wars Unlimited being played and people chatting about it, casting it, etc. Keep in mind that every single tournament, every single result that we'll talk about today is not what I would consider like pro level or anything like that. If you play Magic or you're coming from other card games, I have watched a lot of Magic myself, but the pro tours and those types of tournaments are what I would consider pro level, and these are much smaller, usually anywhere from around 10 to 25 players each. And because of that, you'll start to see a bunch of decks that again are the top decks that consistently pop up, and then sprinkled within those you'll see random lists like a Fennec list here and there, or a Jabba list, or Kylo list popping up, Rey's popping up. Granted, Rey's a little bit less random. Just all sorts of random leaders that you might not expect if you were just to strictly take the absolute best decks and play those in your tournaments. Okay. In terms of this GT1K, the finals was double Boba Green. It was a Boba Green mirror match, no ECL. And I think that's a really big adaptation that Boba Green has kind of incorporated, since a lot of your units already have ambush or already ready up. That's Fire Spray, Maul, Forlom, things like that. This was a pretty close matchup, but this was a matchup that really kind of shows the fact that Boba Green is becoming more and more popular, and you're starting to see a lot more of it. The second tournament, and again, we'll talk more about all the archetypes in a moment after I just give you a brief rundown on some of the finals matches, was a double yellow OG Han versus Sabine Green. Now, Sabine Green really showed up this past couple of weeks on so many different areas of tournaments. It is, at least in my opinion, and has been my opinion since set one, it is the best aggro deck, just straight up aggro. And yes, it's plays some more expensive stuff in Wrecker and Poe, but the whole concept of the deck is intending to be a very aggressive, very straightforward, kind of beat you down type deck, and in some cases requires a little bit less brain power than some of these other lists. Double yellow Han, OG Han. This is a list that I have been complimenting for quite some time, ever since we really saw it at the beginning of set 2, the DJ and tech combo. This is a really powerful list, and is really able to put in a lot of work against all sorts of different archetypes, especially against a lot of the control decks that we're starting to see. This was a full game 3. And Sabine Green did take it home. Of course, Boba Green took it home in the day 1. And then the third tournament that I ended up watching was the Take the Initiative Star Wars Unlimited in Madison 1K cash tournament. And we saw a Bosk Blue versus Sabine Green finals, where again Sabine Green took it home. So we're starting to see again more hard control pop up, and still seeing the decks that were the very best at the start of set 2 continue to be some of the strongest contenders, even though we're starting to see, as I said, more Bosk Blue, more control archetypes, and all manner of other things. With all that said, where kind of are we now? What are the best decks? Where is the meta at? We saw Sabine Green, we're seeing Boss Blue, we're seeing Han Yellow. Across the board, not just in these 1K cash tournaments, what is everyone playing? What are the best decks? And that's where I gotta pull up here. Let me just pull this up real quick. So here we are. These are the top 7 archetypes that have consistently popped up across all of the various small tournaments that we've been talking about. Okay. Now, this is really important to note that these, while being very consistent and also very powerful, can all be taken down by various different random archetypes that you see. If you are playing like a pro tour in Magic or a big tournament, you will start to filter out a lot of these random decks, such as things like Fennec and Kylo. But because we're playing small tournaments, the variance is extremely high in card games. And depending on all manner of different circumstances, you could have Jabba Yellow, Fennec, Kylo. You could have like Hunter, potentially even in some of these top 8s, and that wouldn't be super surprising. The difference between these 7 and the other archetypes that we've mentioned or pop up every once in a while is that these consistently pop up in the top 8, at least for the last month or so. Now, each one of these kind of has that good matchup and bad matchup against various different decks here. And I'm going to kind of give just a general perspective on this. Some people may disagree. This is just kind of a little bit more of theoretical knowledge from card games, but also based on how each of these matchups have played out. Starting us off with double yellow Han. This deck is really all about the same things that Boba Yellow is trying to do, getting to leverage extra resources for additional disruption or additional pressure, and getting down some very powerful threats early on, while also not only disrupting your opponent's units, but disrupting their resource base. This generally gives you a little bit of an advantage against control decks if you're able to set up the tech DJ combo, but also just having tech in your deck usually ends up being pretty powerful. That, alongside with having cunning in your list for 4 resources, you really do get massive value in terms of exhausting and bouncing some smaller units. So I found this list to be pretty powerful against the Bosk Blues. I found it to be pretty powerful against things like Sabine Green, as you are able to disrupt them while also getting high value units. For example, one of the nightmare scenarios for Sabine Green is your opponent goes Millennium Falcon on turn 1 when you play an A-Wing. And that can just really make your whole day sad. And then by the time you're flipping Sabine, there's a chance that they could be stealing one of your resources. You could even put like a dark saber on it. So that could be a little bit tricky. In terms of Boba Green, this is going to be a little bit more of a mid-range aggro archetype. One of the cards that has really put Boba Green on the map is Maul for set 2. Now, again, that's very different from set 1, because one of the big combos that you were looking to set up in set 1 was your Boba Fett flip into Steadfast Battalion ECL. Oftentimes, these Boba Green decks are not running ECL anymore. And the way they've built it is because of Forlom's Mauls and Bosks and things like that don't need ECL in order to ambush out, because they have ambush on their baseline. Boba Green tends to be extremely solid against things like Sabine Wren. You usually have a pretty solid early game threat pool, while also being able to actually aggro you down with things like Maul that end up being closers while also removing your units, kind of like the Wrecker, but you don't even need the ECL portion, which gives you that extra 5 HP, which also helps you race against Sabine. It's also very strong against things like, well, Boba Yellow, as you have a lot of different tools to be able to survive long enough and outvalue your opponents. When we're looking at Boba Yellow, this is a list that is tempoing while also aggroing, a little bit different or vastly different than Boba Green, but similar to Han Yellow in that you're still using things like cunnings, waylays, bounce effects to leverage extra resources, get down on the board early, and then close out the game. This deck, there isn't really much we need to talk about this one, because usually the best matchups come in the form of Sabine Green, and really just any sort of early aggro performance that any deck wants to get down really gets hindered and outclassed by Boba Fett. Between the two double yellow archetypes, I think most of the time I would prefer the double yellow Boba because of the explosive turns and the ability to really disrupt your Han Solo turns that you're looking for, especially with something like No Good to Me Dead. But overall, it does pretty good against a lot of things. This is one of those decks that really only has a terrible matchup against the hard control decks, where you can't leverage additional resources because there's no units to bounce or remove or disrupt. So you have to focus on their hand, and Boba Fett does have a hard time with that. Sabine Green, this is an interesting list as because of how focused in on early damage while also having a lot of direct damage with 4 Cause and the Sabine action and an early Sabine flip. This can go underneath any list in the game, and I don't think has a terrible matchup against any list. I think the worst matchups I found for it have been the Boba Yellows and the Han Yellows. Well, Han Yellow less so than Boba Yellow, because Boba Yellow really comes down so fast with an extra point of stats. And that extra point is huge because you can't just kill it with Poe Dameron without discarding a card, or you can't like heroic sacrifice into the Boba Fett with like a K2, which is extremely relevant. But it still is able to outpace. It does really well at doing its game plan, which is getting in damage. And every single deck has to prepare for the early aggro decks, even though Sabine Wren is more top end than it used to be with Poe Damerons and Wreckers. It's still using those cards to do direct damage to you with ECL Poes, ECL Wreckers, overwhelming in for extra damage. And that's one of the reasons why I think Boba Green also is showing up a lot, is it kind of has that same concept as Sabine Green, where your finisher is a 7 cost, or Wrecker is 6 cost, but Maul is a 7 cost, ambusher that has a 7/6 stat line with Overwhelm. Like, that is what makes it super powerful. In Maul's case, you can oftentimes keep it alive. In Wrecker's case, you also have that 5 damage trigger, which allows you to overwhelm for more damage. Wrecker is a little bit more aggressive in that sense, but Maul allows you to survive and get a little bit extra value, and it works perfectly with Boba Fett. Bossk Blue. This has been probably the best hard control list that we've seen from set 2, or at least I would put it up there, as we haven't really seen any other hard control list really perform nearly as well. And there are 2 things that Bossk really does well. The first thing is kind of adding additional removal to your deck through the use of bounties. So you get to draw cards and remove units with Bossk's action. And the second thing is how fast he deploys for a really solid stat line. 5 to flip 4/6 is a really solid stat line. And the fact that he flips so early not only allows you to actually prevent some of the pressure that some people are putting on, but also actually close out the game. And that's something that doesn't happen very often with hard control lists. But your opponent kind of does need to deal with Bossk because you have so much healing, so much removal, that you can sometimes just remove, and then have Bossk close out the game with 4 damage a turn. Against 25 HP bases, that's, oftentimes, let's say against Sabine, you're looking at like 6 attacks, and sometimes even 5 attacks, because Sabine action also deals a couple points of damage to their own base. So that isn't that crazy. And I know 5 attacks seems like a lot, but that's where you're looking to get into anyways in terms of resource line for card control decks, which can be pretty powerful. Usually this deck's best matchups are going to be against the tempo decks. However, Han Yellow with that Tech DJ combo can really upset Bossk. However, if you are a player that is fighting against Han Yellow and you know of the combo and you prepare for it and you remove the potential for that, it can really hinder Han in great ways. But these decks that are looking to disrupt your units don't do anything against the hard control list when you have like 6 units in your whole deck. That type of situation. Usually, actually, this deck has a very good matchup because it goes slightly bigger than a lot of things. Usually has a pretty good matchup against Han Solo. New Han Solo has a pretty good matchup against Kira Green. It has a pretty good matchup against Boba Yellow, and in some cases Han Yellow, if they don't have the Tech DJ combo. But can still struggle against Sabine Green. It's one of the reasons why we saw Sabine Green take it out, even though most of its main deck answers are for the aggro decks. Again, Sabine is just such an efficient and ruthless aggro deck that you will oftentimes just lose, despite you having a lot of preparation for it. New Han Blue. This is a list that I personally have found to be super fun while also being extremely powerful. This is one of those lists that you just kind of just play it one card a turn and you hope that that's good enough because of how much value it brings. A lot of the cards come down and do something immediately. Things like Luke Skywalker, things like Redemption, things like Chewbacca, things like what's another one? Well, all sorts of random units that come down and do something immediately. And they oftentimes have a decent stat line to trade with things early on. You can play a K2 on turn 2, but it's got 4 power, 2 toughness. You can play a Kanan on turn 2. It's 4 power, 3 toughness. Those are usually good enough stat lines to actually kill your opponent's units that you otherwise would not be able to kill. This does usually do pretty well against Sabine Green, as it's got a decent amount of restore in it, and the late game threats do actually restore massive chunks, so to put it out of range of burn events and things like that. It also does do pretty well against other kind of mid-range decks, not necessarily against some of the tempo decks like Boba Yellow, but usually does do pretty well against Boba Green, and in some cases Kira Green. Boba Green is a little bit easier because Kira Green does have like Fell the Dragons and Power the Dark Sides in its main deck, which Han Solo can struggle against, and usually does pretty mediocre against Bossk Blue. When you're playing one threat at a turn and your control opponent just needs to kill one thing, while also in some cases you're dealing damage to your own units, so you can put a bounty on it and just kind of deal a couple damage to finish it off and claim the bounty. That can be really, really tricky. And lastly, in Kira Green's case, this has been a kind of higher, more proactive, I should say, soft control list. You'll notice at the 3 bottom, those are kind of the controlling lists. The top 4 are going to be the aggro lists, more aggro lists. And Kira Green's case is more about being a proactive soft control list. And in some cases, using Kira just as a 7-powered attacker if you get to kill a 3-powered unit to close out the game extremely quickly. And then in other cases, just using Hylobond Enforcers and Pike Sentinels with shields to trade early and then close out the game with Avengers. This is kind of like your previous Krennic Greens and Iden Greens of the world, but Kira Green just tends to be a little bit stronger because you use your leader flip as an event to deal a bunch of damage, and in some cases just getting a little bit extra value early on into the game. These 7 are the lists that you're looking at, and any one of these 7, I think you're gonna have pretty good chances. If I were to rate them like 1 to 7 in terms of at least what I've seen, as well as kind of how they've performed the last month, I would put Sabine Green in the number 1 or potentially number 2 slot. I might have like 1 spot to move here. And I would also put Boba Green up there in that number 1, number 2 spot, at least in terms of how they've performed over the last month, right? How they performed in the tournaments and what they've been able to do against the field. Because one of the things that you really need to pay attention to, yes, some of these lists are exceptionally powerful at dealing with the other lists on this group of 7, but you also need to be able to deal with some random kind of throw-ins, right? Can you deal with a hyper aggressive Kylo? Can you deal with like the random Dr. Aphra Blue that comes in? For example, Bossk is horrible against that, whereas, you know, Sabine Green doesn't really care about Aphra Blue, much less so than they care about Bossk Blue. So I would put Sabine Green and Boba Green kind of near that top, after which I would probably put Bossk Blue in that number 3rd spot. We've seen a lot of Bossk Blues taking down tournaments. It is the quintessential hard control deck that we're seeing now. After that, we saw a lot of new Han Blues just overall, not necessarily taking final spots or anything, but just in the top 8. So I think between new Han Blue and the Boba Yellow, we're looking at the number 4 and number 5 slots. And then we have Han Yellow and Kira Green. I would probably put Kira Green slightly ahead of Han Yellow. I think Han Yellow is the weakest of these 7. There are some things that it does really well, but there are also some things that it really struggles against. And one of the things that can be really tricky for it is if your hard control player or your soft control players can deal with the Tech DJ combo pretty easily, a large chunk of your deck is kind of irrelevant in terms of what you're trying to back up that strategy with, because that's oftentimes the plan you really want to go with and makes it really oppressive. Also, on that note, one of the most important 7 resource plays is a unit that attacks, right? In the Han Solo unit, which can be pretty weak against some of the hard control decks as well. So, while ironically it's good against hard control lists because of the combo, it can be pretty bad because of the combo as well. In terms of just getting the 1 through 7, those are my rough spots. If I were just to give you straight up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Sabine at 1, Boba Green at 2, Bosk Blue at 3, New Han Blue at 4, Boba Yellow at 5, Kira Green at 6, and Han Yellow at 7. The other list that we started to see a lot, and I talked about this before, Jabba. People are really loving Jabba Yellow. I played a deck on it recently. I know someone else played a deck on it recently. I know it reached a top spot in a tournament, which is one of the reasons why I played the deck in the first place, as an improvement over the first iteration of me playing Jabba Yellow way back when, like 2 months ago. I think it was like a month and a half, 2 months ago. But also, we are seeing Kylos, we're seeing a little bit of Fennec, we're seeing some Idens, we're seeing Cad Banes. Any list that you play and you want to bring to a store showdown is probably going to give you some good opportunity as long as you're a proficient player. But these are the lists that we have to contend with nowadays. So let me know what you think about the meta right now. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you all for the next one.